"Give me the colony's location," Haelric said, "and I will let the last three breathe." Commander Terk Ansari did not look up from the console he was dismantling. He pulled the secondary data core from its housing, slid it into the magnetic sleeve on his belt, and sealed the sleeve with 2 quick thumb presses. The console went dark. In the reflection of the dead screen he could see Haelric's face. Long, angular, the color of tarnished copper, the deep-set eyes of a Velhari officer who had spent 40 years climbing through the Compact's intelligence directorate by being the kind of patient, precise operator who never needed to raise his voice. Haelric was not raising his voice now. He stood in the doorway of the communications vault with 2 armed Velhari guards behind him, their carbines leveled, and he spoke the way a man speaks when he is certain the math is already settled. "You have extracted the data cores. That is expected. You are trained to deny us material intelligence. I respect the protocol. But the cores are encrypted, and you know it, and I know it, and the 3 members of your team still alive in the holding bay know it. The encryption keys reside in your neural implant, not in the cores. So we arrive at the same place we always arrive, Commander. You are the lock, and I am asking you to open." Ansari turned around. He was 46 years old, lean, with the kind of face that carried fatigue without advertising it, lines around the eyes, a scar along the left jawline from a training accident 15 years ago that he had never bothered to have repaired. His uniform was torn at the left shoulder where a Velhari guard had grabbed him during the initial breach. His hands were steady. They had been steady since the first alarm, 12 hours ago, when the Velhari strike team had burned through the outer airlock of Station Karpos and killed the first 4 of his people in the corridor outside the analysis bay. Station Karpos was a signals intelligence post. 41 Terran naval intelligence personnel, stationed in a system that the Velhari Compact considered unclaimed, and that the Terran Intelligence Directorate considered perfect, a dead system with clear sightlines to 7 Velhari communications relay stations. For 3 years, Ansari's team had been intercepting, decrypting, and cataloging Velhari military communications, fleet deployments, logistics chains, officer rotations, the internal politics of the Compact's ruling caste. The content of closed session debates in the Compact's high chamber. 3 years of patient, invisible work that had given Earth's strategic planners a clearer picture of Velhari military capability than the Velhari's own field commanders possessed. The Velhari had found them. Someone had talked a trade route informant, a diplomatic liaison who had noticed the wrong signal at the wrong time, a pattern analyst in the Compact's own intelligence service who had finally matched the ghost signature that Ansari's technicians had worked so hard to mask. It did not matter how. What mattered was that at 300 station time, a Velhari fast assault ship had dropped out of transit 14 kilometers from Station Karpos, deployed a breaching team, and begun killing his people. Of the 41, 12 were dead. 26 had been taken to the station's cargo bay, now a holding area. 3 more were in the medical ward, wounded. Ansari was the 41st. Haelric had separated him immediately, recognizing from the rank insignia and the neural implant scar behind his left ear that this was the station's commanding officer and the only person whose implant held the master encryption keys for the intelligence archive. The archive was the prize, not the station, not the people. The archive, 3 years of intercepted communications that would tell the Velhari exactly how much Earth knew about their military, their politics, their vulnerabilities. With the archive, the Compact could change everything: codes, deployments, patrol routes, diplomatic positions. Without it, they would spend years guessing what had been compromised. Haelric wanted the archive. Ansari's job was to make sure he never got it. "You have a particular set of skills," Haelric continued, his voice measured. "Specifically, the ability to resist coercion. Your training is excellent. Terran Naval Intelligence's resistance protocols are among the most sophisticated I have encountered. I have studied them. I know you have a 48-hour window before your neural implant begins automated key degradation, after which the encryption becomes permanently unrecoverable. I know you will attempt to endure until that window closes. I respect this. He stepped into the vault, the guards followed. But I want you to understand the arithmetic, Commander. In the holding bay, 26 of your people are alive. In the medical ward, 3 more. I have been authorized to apply graduated pressure to secure the archive. The first stage begins in 1 hour. It will not involve you. It will involve the 26 in the holding bay, 1 per hour, starting with the most junior. The youngest member of your team is, I believe, Petty Officer Kaya Demir. She is 22 years old. She was recruited out of a linguistics program at the University of Ankara. She has been on this station for 4 months. Ansari's face did not change. Inside him, something dropped, a cold weight settling into his chest like a stone lowered into deep water. He had recruited Demir himself. He had read her thesis on Velhari phonemic structures, had recognized in it the kind of intuitive pattern sense that no amount of training could replicate, had personally called her advisor to request early release from the program. She had translated more Velhari diplomatic traffic in 4 months than any analyst in the directorate had managed in a year. She was brilliant, and she was 22, and she was in the holding bay because he had brought her to a station that the Velhari had just found. 1 per hour, Haelric repeated. 26 hours. That is 22 hours more than your implant needs. The math is clear, Commander. You can save them or you can let me work through them. The choice is yours. The clock begins now. Haelric turned and walked out of the vault. The door sealed behind him. The magnetic lock engaged with a sound like a bolt sliding home. Ansari stood in the dark vault and breathed. In, out. The air recycler hummed its low monotone. The dead consoles cast no light. The only illumination came from the status indicator on his neural implant, a small green dot behind his left ear, visible in the reflection of the blank screen he had just stripped. Green meant active. Green meant the encryption keys were intact. Green meant the 48-hour countdown had not yet started, because degradation was triggered manually, by a specific sequence of subvocal commands that only Ansari knew, or automatically if his vital signs flatlined for more than 90 seconds. He had not triggered it yet. That was the first decision. The second decision was harder. He closed his eyes and ran the numbers the way he had been trained to run them, without sentiment, without hope, with only the variables and the outcomes. 48 hours until automated degradation. 1 hostage per hour if Haelric kept his word. 26 hostages. The Velhari needed the keys within 48 hours or the archive became worthless. If Ansari triggered degradation now, the keys would begin fragmenting immediately, a 12-hour process that would render them permanently unrecoverable. But Haelric would learn within minutes. The implant's status could be read by Velhari medical scanners. And once Haelric knew the keys were degrading, the hostages lost their leverage value. At that point, the 26 in the bay were no longer bargaining chips. They were witnesses. Ansari knew what the Velhari did with witnesses. So he could not trigger degradation. Not yet. Not until his people were safe or until the 48 hours ran out naturally. He needed to stall. He needed time. And he needed someone outside the station to know what was happening. He opened his eyes and looked at the data core in the magnetic sleeve on his belt. The core was encrypted, useless without the keys in his implant. But it also contained a secondary communications protocol that he had built into the system 2 years ago, during a long night when he had sat in this vault, and considered the possibility that someday the station would be compromised, and he would need to call for help without the Velhari knowing. The protocol was a burst transmitter embedded in the core's diagnostic subsystem. It would send a single compressed packet, station location, hostile force composition, number of hostages, situation assessment, on a frequency that piggybacked on the Velhari's own communications relay. The Velhari would not detect it because it used their own signal as a carrier wave. The transmission would reach Terran naval intelligence's listening post at Relay Kestrel in approximately 47 minutes. He had 48 hours. The burst would arrive in 47 minutes. After that, everything depended on how fast Earth responded. Ansari pulled the data core from its sleeve, interfaced it with his neural implant through the subdermal contact on his left wrist, and initiated the burst protocol. The core's diagnostic LED flickered once amber green, then dark. The packet was away. He replaced the core in the sleeve, sat down on the vault floor with his back against the stripped console, and began to wait. 47 minutes, then a question: had anyone heard? The answer came not in 47 minutes but in 43, when the encrypted reply pinged his neural implant through the same carrier wave channel. One line of text, decoded by the implant and displayed on his retinal overlay in pale green characters. Signal received. Iron Hand initiated. ETA 31 hours. Hold. Ansari read the message twice. Then he closed his eyes and let the words settle into the place where the cold weight was sitting. Iron Hand, he knew the designation. Every senior intelligence officer in the Terran Naval Intelligence Directorate knew it, the way a submariner knows the word SUBSUNK, a code you study, a code you drill, a code you pray you never have to send. Iron Hand was a contingency protocol, a specific response package designed for a specific scenario, the capture of an active signals intelligence post, and the potential compromise of a strategic intelligence archive. The protocol authorized the immediate deployment of a dedicated strike group with a single objective: recover the personnel, deny the archive to the enemy, and ensure that the hostile force understood the cost of the action it had taken. 31 hours. Hailrick's clock gave him 48. That meant Ansari had 17 hours of margin. 17 hours during which Hailrick would be working through his hostages, one per hour, and Ansari would need to slow him down without giving him anything real. This was what he had been trained for, not the encryption, not the signals intelligence. This, the cold arithmetic of deception under pressure, the art of giving an interrogator enough to keep him engaged without giving him anything that mattered. Ansari had practiced it in a concrete room at Camp Harrow on Titan for 6 weeks, against instructors whose job was to break him. They had not broken him, and they had not been threatening 26 of his people. He stood up, walked to the vault door, and knocked twice. The magnetic lock disengaged. One of the Velhari guards opened the door. Hailrick was standing in the corridor, hands clasped behind his back, waiting, as if he had never left. "I want to see my people," Ansari said. Hailrick studied him for 3 seconds. "Why?" "Because if you're going to make me choose who lives and who dies, I want to see their faces first. I owe them that." A calculated request. Hailrick would read it as the first crack, the beginning of emotional engagement, the moment when the professional's training begins to fray under the weight of personal responsibility. It was exactly what Hailrick wanted to see. And Ansari needed to see the holding bay because he needed to count the guards, map the exits, and identify which of his people were still capable of moving on their own when the time came. "You may see them," Hailrick said. "For 10 minutes. They walked through the station's main corridor. The overhead lights were at half power. The Velhari strike team had cut the primary grid during the breach, and the station was running on emergency reserves. The walls were standard Terran naval intelligence construction, reinforced composite, pale gray, lined with conduit housings and access panels that Ansari knew by number. He had walked this corridor every day for 3 years. He knew which panels opened and which were sealed. He knew where the structural voids were. He knew where a person could hide. He noted the placement of Velhari guards as they walked. 2 at the junction of corridors A and B, 2 more at the entrance to the analysis bay, 1 at the environmental control station, 3 at the cargo bay doors, the holding area, 11 guards visible. The strike team had likely deployed 30 to 40 operatives total. The fast assault ship sitting 14 kilometers out would have additional crew, but those would be ship personnel, not assault troops. The cargo bay doors opened. The bay was large, the station's primary storage area, designed to hold supply crates and equipment pallets. The crates had been pushed to the walls. In the center of the cleared space, the 26 members of Ansari's team sat on the deck in rows, hands zip-tied behind their backs with Velhari restraints. 2 guards stood at each end of the bay, carbines ready. The lighting was emergency red. The bay's main overheads were offline, and the Velhari had not bothered to restore them. Ansari looked at them. He knew every face. Lieutenant Commander Elise Varro, his executive officer, sitting upright against the far wall, her jaw set, a bruise darkening the left side of her face where a guard's elbow had caught her during the roundup. Varro was the second most senior officer on the station and the only other person who held dual authorization clearance for the archive. She caught Ansari's eye and held it. He read the look. I am functional. Tell me what you need. Beside her, Lieutenant Sarin, the chief cryptanalyst, hunched forward, pale, blood on his uniform from a head wound that someone had bandaged with a torn sleeve. Sergeant Costa, the security team's surviving member, sitting with deliberate stillness, his eyes tracking the guards with the professional attention of a man who had already counted them, already mapped the exits, already run the scenarios. Costa had been on 3 prior combat deployments. He knew what a holding bay looked like, and he knew what came next if nobody changed the equation. And at the end of the second row, Petty Officer Kaya Demir, 22 years old, small, dark-haired, sitting cross-legged with her bound hands resting on her lap. Her face was calm, not blank calm, the calm of a person who has understood the situation and decided that panic serves nothing. She looked at Ansari and nodded once, a small motion that said, I know the situation. I am not going to break. Ansari looked at each of them in turn. 26 people, his people. The people he had recruited, trained, stationed here, and failed to protect. He had 10 minutes, and he used 9 of them standing in the doorway of the cargo bay, making eye contact with each person in turn, noting their condition, their positioning, their proximity to the guards and the exits. He counted injuries, 7 visible, none critical. He counted restraints, standard Velhari zip ties, breakable with the right tool or enough leverage. He counted the distance from the nearest row of hostages to the portside bulkhead, 4 meters. On the 10th minute, he turned to Hailrick. I need to think, he said. Give me 2 hours. You have 1, Hailrick said. 1 hour is not enough time to decide who lives. It is exactly enough time, Commander. That is the point. They returned him to the vault, the door sealed, the lock engaged. Ansari sat on the floor and began working through the deception plan. Iron Hand was 30 hours out. Hailrick's first execution was 50 minutes away. The plan needed to accomplish 2 things. Slow Hailrick's timeline by feeding him credible-seeming information that would require verification, and position the hostages for extraction when the strike group arrived. The deception would work in 3 layers. Layer 1, partial cooperation. Ansari would provide fragments of the encryption sequence, real fragments, but incomplete, presented as the full key under the pretense that his resistance was breaking. Each fragment would take Hailrick's technical team approximately 2 to 3 hours to test against the archive. Each test would fail because the fragments were incomplete. Layer 2, emotional leverage reversed. Hailrick expected Ansari to crumble under the pressure of watching his people die. Instead, Ansari would redirect the emotional calculus. He would ask to speak to each hostage before Hailrick's deadline, frame it as a farewell, a commander's last duty. In reality, each conversation would be a briefing. Layer 3, the archive itself. The data cores Ansari had pulled were genuine, but the primary archive was not stored on them. The real archive, the full 3-year intelligence take, was distributed across 17 separate memory modules embedded in the station's hull plating, each one sealed behind a maintenance panel and accessible only by someone who knew the station's construction intimately. The Velhari would never find them without the station's engineering schematics, which Ansari had purged in the first 4 minutes of the breach. At 4:15, the vault door opened. Hailrick stood in the corridor with a guard and a Velhari medical technician carrying a portable scanner. "Your implant," Hailrick said. "The technician will verify its status." The scanner hummed over Ansari's skull. The technician studied the readout and spoke to Hailrick in Velhari, a rapid exchange that Ansari followed without difficulty. He had spent 3 years intercepting their language. He understood every word. "Keys are intact. No degradation initiated. The 48-hour window has not started." Hailrick nodded. "Good. The hour is up, Commander. I will begin with Petty Officer Demir in 15 minutes unless you provide me with the first encryption sequence." "I need something first," Ansari said. "Name it." "I need to see Demir. 5 minutes alone." "Why?" "Because she is 22 years old and I recruited her. And if this is the last conversation she has with her commanding officer, I will not have it happen through a locked door." Hailrick was silent for 4 seconds. He was reading the request the same way Ansari intended him to read it, as a commander's guilt, as the first emotional fracture, as the opening that would lead to compliance. It was the correct reading. It was also incomplete. "5 minutes," Hailrick said. "The guards will be outside the door." They brought Demir to the communications vault. She walked in with her hands still bound, her back straight, her boots making no sound on the metal decking. The door closed behind her. The guards remained outside. Ansari spoke quietly, his lips barely moving, his voice pitched below the threshold of the Velhari audio surveillance that he knew was running through the vault's overhead conduit. He had identified the sensor during his first week on station, and had spent 3 years calibrating his voice to stay beneath it. "Listen carefully, do not react, nod once if you understand." She nodded. "Iron Hand is 30 hours out. A strike group is inbound. I need you to go back to the holding bay and pass 3 things to Varro and Costa in that order. First, extraction is real 30-hour window. Second, when the breach alarm sounds a double pulse on the station's emergency system, everyone moves to the portside bulkhead. That wall has maintenance panels every 3 meters. Behind each panel is a structural void large enough to shelter 2 people. Third, Costa needs to position himself near the bay's secondary ventilation access, the overhead grill at the northeast corner. When the strike team breaches, that grill leads to Corridor C, which leads to the docking bay. Questions?" "No, sir." "One more thing. Hailrick is going to bring me back and tell me the hour is up. I am going to give him a partial encryption fragment. It will fail. He will come back. I will give him another. Each one buys 2 to 3 hours. The timeline works if the strike group holds its ETA." Demir looked at him. Her eyes were steady. "And if the timeline slips?" "Then I trigger degradation, and the archive becomes permanently unrecoverable. Hailrick loses his prize. At that point, our value as hostages depends on whether the compact wants a diplomatic incident or a quiet disposal. I assess diplomatic incident as more likely. The compact's high chamber is risk-averse. You've run this scenario before." "I've run every scenario, Petty Officer. That is literally my job." Something passed across her face, not quite a smile, but close. The recognition that the man standing in front of her was not improvising. He had spent 3 years in this vault preparing for the possibility that someone would come through the door, and now that they had, he was executing a plan that had been waiting in his head like a loaded weapon. "Go back," he said. "Tell Varro, tell Costa, keep your face neutral." She nodded and knocked on the door. The guards opened it and escorted her back to the holding bay. Ansari sat down on the vault floor and closed his eyes. 29 hours. He needed to buy 29 hours against an interrogator who was giving him 1-hour increments, and he needed to do it without losing a single person. The next 11 hours were the most precisely choreographed performance of Terran Ansari's career. Hailrick returned at 4:30 and demanded the first encryption sequence. Ansari gave him a string of 64 characters, real characters from the encryption protocol, but drawn from the secondary verification layer rather than the primary key. The distinction was invisible without the decryption architecture. Hailrick's technical team would spend 2.5 hours running the string against the archive before concluding that it unlocked the verification layer but not the data itself. At 700, Hailrick returned. His expression was unchanged, the copper face patient, the deep-set eyes betraying nothing. The string was incomplete, Commander. I told you it would take time. The key is layered. What I gave you opens the first gate. The second gate requires a paired sequence that I need to reconstruct from memory. The implant stores the master, but the reconstruction protocol is manual. I build each layer by hand. It takes time. This was a lie. The key was a single unified string, but the lie was constructed on a foundation of truth. Terran Naval Intelligence's encryption architecture was notoriously complex, and Hailrick's own knowledge of it was incomplete. He could not verify Ansari's claim without an expert who understood Terran encryption design at the implementation level, and no such expert existed in the Velhari Compact. Ansari knew this because his team had intercepted every personnel transfer and recruitment bulletin the Compact's intelligence directorate had issued in 3 years. They had no one. Hailrick accepted the explanation. He gave Ansari 3 more hours. During those 3 hours, Ansari listened. Boots past the vault door every 12 minutes, guards on a fixed circuit, equipment cases in the analysis bay, the technical team setting up. A brief argument in Velhari at 8:12, ending when a senior voice snapped a command. Tension. Hailrick's team had expected a fast extraction. 7 hours in with nothing to show, and every hour the assault ship sat in this system was an hour that a Terran patrol might detect it. At 8:45 his implant pinged, ON schedule. At 1000, Ansari provided a second string. This one was drawn from the tertiary authentication layer, a deeper component that would take the Velhari technical team longer to test because it interfaced with the archive's indexing system. The test would fail, but it would fail in a more interesting way, partially unlocking the index before hitting a dead end. The near miss would keep the technical team engaged, would make them believe they were one layer away from the full archive. By the time they concluded it was another partial, 3 more hours had passed. At 1300, Hailrick's patience shifted. Not broke, shifted. The copper face was still composed, but the cadence of his speech had changed. Shorter sentences, fewer qualifiers, the language of an interrogator who has begun to suspect he is being managed. Commander, you have given me 2 partial sequences. Both opened subsidiary functions. Neither opened the archive. I am beginning to consider the possibility that you are stalling. I am reconstructing a 12-layer encryption key from memory under duress, Hailrick. The process is not instantaneous. The process has taken 9 hours. My authorization permits me to resume the original timetable. Resume it, and the next string I give you will be deliberately corrupted. You will spend 6 hours testing it before you realize it leads nowhere. Then you will come back to me and I will give you another corrupted string and another, and you will never know which one is real. You need my cooperation. Killing my people does not produce cooperation. It produces defiance. You studied our resistance protocols. You know this. Hailrick regarded him for a long time. His right hand opened and closed once, the only involuntary gesture Ansari had seen from him in 10 hours. Then he turned and walked to the door. You have 4 more hours, Commander, At 1700 I resumed the original timetable, 1 per hour, starting with Demir. The door sealed. He reviewed the timeline. At 1700, Haelric would return. A third fragment would collapse the layered key narrative. The technical team was too close to seeing the pattern. He needed the secondary system, Gambit ready. At 1445, Velhari voices reached him through the door, raised, argumentative. A subordinate pushing back, wanting to escalate. Haelric's reply, short, flat, final. Silence. But the argument told Ansari something valuable. Haelric was spending political capital to maintain his approach. That capital was finite. 20 hours until Iron Hand. The breathing room was thin. The deception was holding, but it was beginning to strain. The Velhari technical team was not incompetent. They had been recruited from the Compact's best cryptographic programs, and each failed attempt brought them closer to understanding that the strings Ansari was providing were not layers of a sequential key, but fragments from different subsystems entirely. One more round, maybe two, and they would see the pattern. He needed another angle, something to redirect Haelric's attention away from the key and toward a target that would consume time without yielding results. At 1530, he knocked on the vault door. "I need to speak to Haelric." The guard relayed the request. 5 minutes later, Haelric arrived. "I want to make a deal," Ansari said. Haelric's expression did not change. "I am listening. The archive is not the only thing of value on this station. The signal intercepts, the raw traffic we collected from your relay stations, are stored in a secondary system that is not connected to the main archive. I can give you access to the secondary system without the encryption key. It contains 3 years of intercepted Velhari communications, unprocessed, unanalyzed, but complete." This was true. The secondary system existed. The raw intercepts were there, but they were operationally useless raw signal data without the analysis framework that Ansari's team had built to decode and contextualize them. The data was the Compact's own encrypted traffic, reflected back at them without the decryption keys they already possessed. Haelric would not know that until his technical team tried to process the system and realized they were looking at a mirror. But the verification would take time, and time was the only currency Ansari was trading in. Haelric considered the offer for 8 seconds. "Show me." Ansari led him to the analysis bay, the first time he had been out of the vault in 11 hours. The corridor was unchanged, half-power lights, composite walls, conduit housings. The guards followed at 2 paces. Ansari walked past them and into the bay, noting every detail as he passed. Guard positions had not rotated. 2 at the corridor junction, 2 at the bay entrance, 3 at the cargo bay doors, 1 at environmental control. The total was still 11 visible. Professional but static, Haelric was running a holding operation, not a dynamic security posture. That mattered. Static guards developed routines. Routines developed blind spots. He accessed the secondary system through a terminal in the analysis bay. The screen filled with data, signal logs, frequency charts, timestamp indices. 3 years of Velhari communications in their original encrypted format. Haelric studied the data. "This is unprocessed. Raw intercepts, your own communications reflected back at you. It tells you which frequencies we monitored, which relay stations we had line of sight to, and how long we were listening. That has operational value." It did, and extracting it from the raw logs would take hours. Hours during which no one was testing encryption strings. Haelric assigned 3 technicians to the secondary system. He returned Ansari to the vault. The door sealed, the lock engaged. At 1700, Haelric did not resume the original timetable. The secondary system had bought Ansari 4 more hours. Between 1700 and 1830, the Velhari technicians chattered on the analysis bay intercom, audible faintly through the vault door, cross-referencing frequencies. building a picture of which relay stations had been compromised. They would find the information useful but not urgent, and extracting it from 3 years of unindexed logs would consume hours. Good. At 1815, his neural implant pinged a third time. Iron Hand confirms ETA, 12 ships, Recovery Protocol Alpha, advise hostage positions. He subvocalized a reply during a burst of routine Velhari chatter, hiding the signal inside the noise. Hostages cargo bay port side. Extraction via shuttle preferred. Commander remains on station. Acknowledgement came 4 seconds later. At 1900, Ansari requested water and a ration pack. Hailrick granted both, a professional courtesy that told Ansari 2 things. The Compact's standing orders still classified this as an intelligence operation rather than a punitive one, and Hailrick still believed the key was obtainable. A dead commander was a commander who could not provide keys. The ration pack was Velhari dense, protein-rich, tasting of minerals, and something faintly alkaline that reminded Ansari of chalk. He ate it sitting on the vault floor, chewing slowly, conserving energy. His body was stiffening from 16 hours on cold metal decking. His left knee, an old injury from a training drop gone wrong on Titan, was sending sharp signals up his thigh. He ignored it the way he had ignored it for 15 years. At 2100, Hailrick returned. His face had changed. Not anger, something colder. The face of a man who has begun to assemble a picture that he does not like, and who is also hearing his ship's captain in his earpiece telling him the clock is running out from a direction he had not anticipated. Your secondary system contains our own communications in their original encryption. We already possess these communications, Commander. The operational value is marginal at best. The frequency mapping has value. It tells you which relays are compromised. Minimal, and you know it. You have been stalling. I have been cooperating under extreme duress with a 12-layer encryption protocol that requires manual reconstruction. You have been feeding me fragments and misdirections for 18 hours. My technical team has concluded that the strings you provided are not sequential layers, but components drawn from 3 different subsystems entirely. You have been moving the pieces around the board to consume time. Hailrick stepped closer, his voice dropped. Why, Commander, what are you waiting for? The question hung in the air between them. Ansari held Hailrick's gaze and said nothing. His face was composed, the practiced blankness of a man who had been trained to give nothing away under any form of pressure. But behind that face, the math was running, the same way it had been running for 18 hours. 18 hours since the burst transmission. Iron Hand was 13 hours out. Hailrick had just identified the stalling pattern. The deception's margin was gone. I will ask you once more, Hailrick said. The encryption key, the full string now, or I begin with Demir and I do not stop. Ansari looked at him. 13 hours. He needed 13 more hours. Hailrick was offering him minutes. There is a third option, Ansari said. Speaker. Let me contact Terran Naval Command. I can request a conditional declassification of the archive, a supervised handover under diplomatic terms. Your compact gets the intelligence. My people live. Earth accepts the compromise because the alternative is a dead intelligence team and a diplomatic crisis that neither government can afford. Everyone walks away. It was an absurd proposal. Hailrick knew it, and Ansari knew it. But it was an absurd proposal that required Hailrick to consider it, to assess its plausibility, to consult with his superiors on the fast assault ship, and to formulate a response. Each step consumed time. And the proposal had one additional virtue. It introduced the concept of a diplomatic resolution, which would make Hailrick's superiors nervous. The Compact's high chamber was deeply risk-averse. Ansari had read 3 years of their closed-session debates and knew exactly how risk-averse. The possibility, however remote, that a diplomatic channel might resolve the situation without the political cost of dead Terran personnel would force the chain of command to pause. And a pausing chain of command was an intelligence officer's best friend. Hailrick studied him. Every option he had was bad, and Ansari had spent 18 hours making sure of that. You are remarkably creative, Commander. I am remarkably motivated. Hailrick left to consult his superiors, the vault sealed behind him. 2 hours passed, then 3. Ansari sat in the dark and listened to the station's systems, the low hum of the air recycler, the distant vibration of the emergency generator, the faint clicks of the Velhari communications equipment that the strike team had patched into the station's network. He could hear them talking on the command channel, faint voices, too low to make out individual words, but the cadence told him what he needed to know. Quick exchanges, interruptions. A senior voice cutting in, then a long silence, then the quick exchanges again. The sound of a chain of command that was debating, which meant the diplomatic proposal had achieved its purpose. At 22:30, the debate escalated. The ship's captain's voice broke through sharply, withdrawal authority and unacceptable exposure, before Hailrick's measured reply cut in. The argument lasted 11 minutes. A third voice intervened on a relayed channel, quality degraded by multiple encryption layers. High chamber. Someone in the compact's leadership settled the dispute. The operation would continue. Hailrick had won the argument. But the argument itself was a gift. 11 minutes of senior officers debating instead of interrogating. At midnight, 21 hours since the breach, 10 hours until Iron Hand, the vault door opened. Hailrick stood in the corridor. Behind him, 2 guards and the medical technician. The High Chamber has declined your proposal. They consider a diplomatic resolution inappropriate given the clandestine nature of your operation. He paused. The original timetable resumes now, Demir first, then 1 per hour. Ansari stood up slowly. His body ached. 21 hours on a metal floor, no food since the Velhari ration at 1900, the water bottle empty since 2200. His left knee locked as he straightened it, and he had to brace one hand against the wall for 3 seconds before the joint released. His neural implant pulsed once, a status check. Keys intact. No degradation. The 48-hour window was at 27 hours remaining. 10 hours until Iron Hand. And Hailrick's face had changed, not the patient copper composure of the first 12 hours but something closer to fatigue. He had been managing an interrogation, a technical team, a restless strike force, and a high chamber monitoring from across compact space. Ansari had one objective. Hailrick had a dozen. Complexity was the enemy of endurance. Ansari saw the opening. Wait, Ansari said. Hailrick stopped. The full encryption key is a single unified string, not 12 layers. I built the layered story to buy time. You were right, I was stalling. Hailrick's expression did not change. I know. I will give you the key, the real key, in exchange for one thing. Name it. My people walked to the docking bay, all 26, the 3 in medical too. You put them on the station's emergency shuttle and you let them launch. Once they are clear, once I have visual confirmation that the shuttle is away, I give you the key, and you can have the archive. And you. I stay, I am the lock as you said. The key is in my implant, I stay until you have what you want. Hailrick was silent for 7 seconds. Ansari counted each one. The proposal was credible because it followed the logic of Hailrick's own framework, the key for the people, the commander's sacrifice for his team. It was the kind of trade that Hailrick's training would recognize as genuine because it cost Ansari everything. It was also a stall. The shuttle launch, the evacuation of 29 people from the holding bay and medical ward to the docking bay, the pre-flight checks, the visual confirmation. The process would take a minimum of 2 hours. 2 hours closer to Iron Hand. The shuttle is monitored, Hailrick said. If it deviates from the direct course to the nearest neutral station, we will disable it. Understood. And if the key you provide is another fragment? It will not be. You have my word as an officer. Haelric studied him for a long time, then he nodded. The next 2 hours moved with the grinding precision of a mechanism that both sides understood was winding toward its conclusion. The 26 hostages were unbound and escorted from the cargo bay to the station's docking corridor. Ansari watched from the vault's open door as they walked past. Varro first, her bruised face set and hard, her eyes finding Ansari and holding for 2 seconds, long enough to confirm that the timeline was intact. Then Soren with the bloodied bandage still wrapped around his head, walking under his own power but listing slightly to the left. Then the analysts, the technicians, the support staff, each one walking with the controlled gait of a person who has been told they are about to survive, but does not yet believe the corridor will end at the shuttle and not at a wall. Costa walked near the middle of the group, his eyes sweeping the corridor the way they had swept the cargo bay, steady, professional cataloging. He did not look at Ansari. He did not need to. The message had been passed. He knew the plan. Demir walked last, her small frame upright, her bound hands now free, rubbing the circulation back into her wrists. As she passed the vault, she looked at Ansari. He nodded once. She nodded back and kept walking. The 3 wounded from the medical ward were brought on stretchers. Technical Sergeant Merck, who had taken a carbine bolt to the hip during the initial breach, was conscious and lucid. He looked at Ansari as they carried him past and said nothing. His eyes said enough. The other 2, Specialist Leon and Corporal Brask, were sedated, their vital monitors blinking in steady green rhythms. In the docking bay, the station's emergency shuttle, a Terran-built Corvus-class short-range transport, capacity 32, range sufficient for the nearest neutral station, was powered up by Varro and Soren. The Velhari had not damaged it. Shuttles were not targets. They were escape routes, and escape routes were useful to an occupying force that might need to evacuate in a hurry. Varro moved through the pre-flight sequence with the focused efficiency of an officer who understood the stakes. Every minute saved in the bay was a minute of distance between the shuttle and the Velhari assault ship's weapons range. Ansari stood at the docking bay's observation window and watched the pre-flight sequence. Beside him, Haelric stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the same thing. "Your people are competent," Haelric said. "The pre-flight is efficient. They are the best signals intelligence team in the Terran Navy. Then it is regrettable that their work here is over." Ansari said nothing. He watched Varro complete the final systems check, watched Soren seal the main hatch, watched the shuttle's running lights come on: red port, green starboard, white stern. Standard configuration. The docking clamps released with a hydraulic thump that vibrated through the deck plates. The shuttle's maneuvering thrusters fired in short bursts, pushing it clear of the station's docking cradle. Through the observation window, Ansari watched the shuttle move away from the station. It cleared the docking perimeter, turned on its axis, and accelerated on a direct heading toward the nearest neutral beacon, a navigation marker 46 light minutes away at the edge of the system. He watched until the shuttle's engine plume was a bright point against the dark, then a dim point, then nothing. His people were away. All 29 of them, 26 from the cargo bay, 3 from medical. 29 people alive because one man had sat on a metal floor and lied with precision for 23 hours. 7 hours until Iron Hand. The shuttle would reach the neutral beacon in approximately 5 hours. By the time the strike group arrived, his people would be in neutral space, beyond the compact's legal reach. He turned to Haelric. "The key," Haelric said. Ansari looked at him. This was the final move, the one he had been holding since the beginning, the one that made every lie, every fragment, every stalled hour worth the performance. "No," he said. Haelric's face went still. "There is no key I can give you alone, Haelric. There was never a key I could hand over by myself. The encryption protocol requires both the neural implant and a biometric verification from two authorized officers. I am one. Varro is the other. She is on that shuttle. The archive cannot be decrypted without both of us in the same room, and you just let her leave. Hailrick said nothing for 5 seconds. Then, you are lying. I am not. Scan my implant again. Your technician will confirm that the decryption protocol requires dual authorization. The information was there in the first scan. Your technician did not know what to look for because Terran dual-auth architecture is not in the Compact's technical database. Hailrick turned to the medical technician. The technician ran the scanner again, the same humming sweep over Ansari's skull, the same blue readout on the portable display. But this time the technician was looking for something specific. A rapid exchange in Velhari, fast, clipped, the cadence of professionals discovering a variable they had missed. The technician looked at Hailrick and said a single word that Ansari understood perfectly. Confirmed. Hailrick turned back to Ansari. The copper face was rigid. The deep-set eyes were flat. For the first time in 23 hours, the patient, meticulous intelligence officer was looking at a board where all the pieces had been moved by someone else. You spent 23 hours feeding me fragments to buy time for a shuttle launch that would separate the two halves of your encryption protocol. The entire performance, the layered key, the secondary system, the diplomatic proposal, was theater. Yes. And the burst transmission at the beginning, the one you sent from the data core before I returned to the vault. Ansari said nothing. That was a distress call. Ansari said nothing. Something is coming. Yes. Hailrick stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something Ansari had not expected. He exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried the weight of a man who has just understood that the game he thought he was winning was never his game at all. How long? 7 hours, perhaps less. What is coming? A strike group, 12 warships, Terran Naval Intelligence's dedicated recovery force. They are not coming to negotiate, Hailrick. They are coming to take this station back, and to ensure that the Velhari Compact understands the cost of attacking a Terran intelligence post and taking Terran personnel hostage. Hailrick was quiet for a long time. The observation window behind them showed nothing but stars, cold, indifferent points of light in a system that had been dead for 1 billion years, and did not care what two intelligence officers had done to each other across 23 hours. You could have triggered your implant's degradation at any time, Hailrick said, destroyed the key instantly, made the archive worthless in 12 hours. Why did you not? Because if I triggered degradation, you would have recognized it on the scanner within minutes, and my people would have lost their value as bargaining chips. You would have killed them, or your superiors would have ordered it. The Cathara Doctrine, information containment. I have read your operational manuals, Hailrick. I know what happens to witnesses when the mission objective is lost. Something moved behind Hailrick's eyes. A recognition. Not surprise, he was past surprise, but the cold professional acknowledgement that the man in front of him had been operating at a level of information awareness that made the entire 23 hours a fundamentally different kind of contest than Hailrick had believed he was fighting. So you played me for 23 hours to save 29 people. I played you for 23 hours to save 29 people and deny you the archive. Both objectives are complete. Hailrick nodded slowly. I could kill you now. It would change nothing operationally, but it would provide a measure of professional satisfaction. I understand the impulse. But it would also mean that when those 12 warships arrive, the first thing they find is a dead Terran intelligence officer. The Compact's response calculus changes significantly at that point. Right now, you have a failed intelligence operation, embarrassing but recoverable. A dead commander turns this into something the High Chamber cannot contain. Hailrick studied him. The silence in the docking bay stretched, 10 seconds, 15, 20. The only sound was the distant hum of the air recycler and the faint tick of the station's emergency generator winding through its fuel reserves. Then Hailrick said something that surprised Ansari more than any threat would have. "Your people, the 29 on the shuttle, they are safe. I gave my word and I will honor it. The assault ship will not pursue." He paused. "That was your objective and you achieved it through deception, not violence. No one in my custody was harmed. No one in my strike team was killed. You denied me the archive without firing a single shot. That was the design." Hailrick nodded again. He turned to his guards and spoke in Velhari, 3 short sentences that Ansari understood completely. "Withdraw the team to the ship. Signal the fleet that the operation has failed. Leave the commander." The guards looked at Hailrick with visible surprise. The younger one, the officer who had been at Hailrick's shoulder since the breach, began to object. His face carried the rigid certainty of someone who had never lost an operation and did not understand why they were walking away from one now. Hailrick silenced him with a raised hand and a single word in Velhari that meant, roughly, "Earned." "He earned it," Hailrick said, switching to Terran standard so Ansari would hear. "Leave him." The Velhari withdrew in 34 minutes. Organized, professional, unhurried, the retreat of a force that had lost the operational objective but retained its discipline. They unpatched their communications equipment, collected their scanning gear, formed into squads, and moved back through the station's corridors to the docking bay where their breaching shuttle waited. The guards did not look at Ansari as they passed. Hailrick was the last to leave. He stopped at the vault door where Ansari was standing and looked at him one final time. "You are very good at your work, Commander." "So are you, Hailrick." Hailrick held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then he turned, walked down the corridor, boarded the breaching shuttle and was gone. Ansari stood alone in Station Karpos. The lights were at half power. The air recycler hummed. The dead consoles were dark. The breached airlock at the far end of the station let in a faint draft of recycled atmosphere from the emergency sealant the Velhari had applied during entry. 23 hours of performance and the station was silent again. He walked through the station one last time before calling out, past the vault, past the analysis bay, past the cargo bay where 26 of his people had sat bound and waiting, past the corridor where the first 4 had died, Chen, Malik, Orlov, Tors. Their blood was still on the composite walls. The Velhari had not cleaned it. He stopped at the stain and looked at it for 6 seconds. Chen had been a 20-year veteran. Orlov had been 3 months from retirement. Tors had been Demir's bunkmate. 4 people alive at 2:58, dead at 3:04. He would write their letters, all 12. The words would be inadequate. They always were. But he would write them anyway because that was the last duty a commander owed the people who did not make it out. He walked to the analysis bay, lowered himself into the chair at the one terminal that was still active, his legs shaking, the adrenaline finally draining from his system like water from a cracked vessel, and opened a channel to the shuttle. Varro answered on the second pulse. "Commander, status. All 29 aboard. 3 wounded stable. Merck is asking for painkillers and a status update in that order. We are 41 minutes from the neutral beacon." Iron Hand. "We received their beacon 10 minutes ago, 6 hours out. They are requesting a situation update. Tell them the Velhari have withdrawn. The station is secure. The archive is intact. The hull modules are undiscovered. All personnel accounted for. 12 killed in action during the initial breach. 29 evacuated. 1 remaining on station." "Understood." A pause. "How did you get him to leave, sir?" Ansari leaned back in the chair. The exhaustion was settling into his bones now, 23 hours of controlled performance crashing through his body in a single wave. His hands, which had been steady through every fragment, every lie, Every stall were trembling on the armrests. "I told him the truth," he said. "He made a professional assessment. He let you live. He chose not to pay a price for something he could no longer obtain. It was the rational decision. It was mercy, sir." Ansari was quiet for a moment. Through the observation window, the stars burned, cold, distant, indifferent. Somewhere out there, 29 of his people were alive because he had sat on a metal floor and lied with absolute precision for 23 hours. Somewhere closer, a Velhari fast assault ship was breaking orbit, carrying an intelligence officer who had been outplayed and had chosen to walk away clean rather than spend a life he could not profit from. "Maybe," he said. Or maybe he recognized that sometimes the calculation and the mercy point the same direction, and a man who can tell the difference is worth leaving alive. He closed the channel and sat alone in the dark station, watching the stars through the viewport, listening to the hum of the air recycler and the silence where 41 voices used to be. 12 of those voices were gone. He would carry their names for the rest of his career, would write 12 letters, attend 12 services, stand at 12 grave markers with his hands at his sides, and his face composed, and the cold weight in his chest that never fully lifted. But 29 were alive. That was the arithmetic he had chosen, and it was the only arithmetic that mattered. He waited. They arrived 5 hours and 42 minutes later. 12 warships dropping out of transit in a tight diamond formation that filled the station's sensor display with blue-white contacts. The recovery group Iron Hand, led by the heavy cruiser Resolute, and carrying enough firepower to reduce a planetary defense grid to slag. The destroyers fanned out first, taking the perimeter in pairs, their sensor arrays sweeping the system for any remaining Velhari presence. The electronic warfare frigates followed, already broadcasting suppression patterns on every Velhari communications frequency within range. Then the Resolute herself, sliding into position directly above Station Karpos with the unhurried authority of a warship that had arrived expecting a fight and intended to make sure nothing remained that could provide one. Captain Marin Voss of the Resolute hailed the station on the command frequency. "Station Karpos, this is Captain Voss, Terran Naval Intelligence Recovery Group Iron Hand. Report status." Ansari keyed the channel. His voice was hoarse. 22 hours without adequate water had stripped it to something that sounded like gravel dragged across stone. "Iron Hand, this is Commander Ansari. Station is secure. Hostile force has withdrawn. All personnel accounted for, 29 evacuated by shuttle, 1 remaining on station. 12 killed in action. Archive intact in hull storage modules, ready for recovery operations." There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause that carries weight. The silence of a captain who had brought 12 warships across multiple systems expecting a contested extraction, running assault scenarios and casualty projections for 31 hours, and was now processing the information that one intelligence officer had resolved the situation with a neural implant, a burst transmitter, and 23 hours of calculated deception. "Understood, Commander. Recovery teams inbound. Outstanding work." Ansari did not respond to the commendation. He sat in the analysis bay and watched through the viewport as the 12 warships took station around Karpos, the Resolute at center, destroyers at the perimeter in overlapping fields of fire, electronic warfare frigates broadcasting on every frequency. The formation was precise, professional, overwhelming. The kind of formation that did not need to fire a weapon to deliver its message. 12 warships, for 1 signals intelligence post, for 41 people. The Velhari compact would see the deployment. Their own relay stations, the same ones Ansari's team had been monitoring for 3 years, would detect the transit signatures, catalog the ship classes, estimate the combined firepower. They would note the response time, 31 hours from compromise to arrival. They would calculate the force ratio and understand what it meant, not through diplomacy, not through threats, not through the proportional, carefully calibrated responses that interstellar bureaucrats specialized in. They would understand through the simplest, clearest language that existed between civilizations. When you touch our people, this is what arrives. Not a proportional response, not a diplomatic note, not a committee convened to assess the appropriate level of disapproval. 12 warships for 41 people, every time. Every intelligence post, every listening station, every signals officer sitting in a dark vault in a dead system, doing patient, invisible work that no one back on Earth would ever know about. Every one of them carried the same guarantee, not written in any treaty, not ratified by any council, not subject to any cost-benefit analysis by any alien ruling caste. The guarantee was simpler than that, and older, and it could not be bargained down. If you come for them, the answer is disproportionate, immediate, and final. The docking clamps engaged. The recovery teams came aboard, Marines clearing corridors by the book, engineers sealing the breach, a medical team moving toward the places where the 12 had fallen. Ansari heard them moving through his station, their boots on the composite deck plates, their voices calm and professional and alive. The sound of the answer arriving. Commander Terk Ansari stood up from the console, straightened his torn uniform, and went to meet them. The station was quiet, the stars were cold. And somewhere in the dark between systems, a Velhari officer named Haelric was composing a report that would sit on the High Chamber's table the next time anyone in the compact proposed targeting a Terran installation. Not the intelligence assessment, not the force projections, not the diplomatic calculus. The report of an officer who had been outplayed by one man on a metal floor, and the 12 warships that had arrived to collect him. That memory would hold for a very long time. Ansari was counting on it.